Hello, and you are listening to Eco Justice Radio. We present environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame, featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. Welcome, I am Jack Ite. On today's show, Claimed by the Earth, Native Navajo Wisdom, Biocosmology. Host Carrie Kim will be interviewing James Skeet, Executive Director of Covenant Pathways and Spirit Farm in New Mexico. James Skeet and his wife Joyce are the co-founders of Covenant Pathways, a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and they operate Spirit Farm. James is passionate about reconnecting all peoples to the land through what he calls Indigenous Regenerative Intelligence that integrates the ancient native wisdom of the biocosmology to create a haven where soil health, nutrient-rich foods, human health, and free markets can prosper for another, say 10,000 years. James's heritage has assisted in grounding him in the work he does as a full-blooded Navajo, also known as Diné, from Vanderwagen, New Mexico. Along with our host, Carrie Kim, and a group of 15 people from Los Angeles, we visited Spirit Farm near Gallup, New Mexico in May of 2024. It was an amazing education in the Navajo Diné world, where we connected with the land, our hosts, and each other through the guidance of James and Joyce Skeet. James joined us last year for a discussion of his theories of Indigenous Regenerative Intelligence. Please look up and listen to that discussion. We begin now with a clip from James explaining his regenerative farm from a video by New Mexico Community Capital.
My name is James Skeet, and I'm speaking to you from Vanderwagen, New Mexico, which is an old trading post, which really was a part of our heritage. My grandfather grew up here, and his grandfather also, and grandmothers too. The thing about this farm is that it's predating Fort Sumner and after Fort Sumner, where the indigenous people were concentrated in Bosque Redondo. But since we moved back, my grandfather started farming this area, heavy tilling, using tractors, and really destroyed much of the microbial activity in the soil. So Joyce and I moved back here because both my parents had retired, and my dad was very, very much health-wise not in good straits. So we took care of them for a number of years, and eventually they passed. But since that time, which is about 6 years ago, we started looking at the microbial activity in the soil, and we started farming. We started working the farm through composting and getting the microbial activity up and running. And from that, we decided to start a demonstration farm. And the demonstration farm is really to encourage indigenous people to start growing again. But it's hard to grow anything here in the Southwest because the ground is so compacted, and because of climate change, we are now moving into some very brittle and harsh climates. So we really needed to amend the soil and get the microbes back into the soil so that we can start farming again, which has been to a large degree a success. But now what we're trying to do is we're trying to encourage other farmers to get on board and really look at amending the soil. And in that process, we've invented a lot of different technology, like drawing up the compost juice and then amending the water and getting it out along with mulching, heavy mulching, and also using drip lines to get the moisture in the soil. So with all that being said, we coined the term Indigenous Regenerative Intelligence. And indigenous has to do with using local materials, decolonizing ourselves from the colonization that we've been exposed to. And regenerative is really starting with zero, meaning your soil is really bad or there's really no economy here. But moving forward from that, moving up to really get some things flowing again and using local materials. And then the intelligence has to do with how our indigenous people have used the way of farming as a biocosmology. And that biocosmology has to do with using the biology as well as indigenous cosmology, which layers every different levels from the Chostoitini, which is the unseen bugs, all the way up to the plant life, as well as the four-leggeds and into the two-leggeds, and looking how the atmosphere can create the biotic pump again so that we can get this sort of thermal dome that's over us and to begin to break that cycle of desertification and really getting the microbial sponge reestablished on our land. And a lot of that can happen through a different way of looking at soil, a different way of looking at agriculture, using cover crops or using swales, looking at water as a sacred entity, not as a commodity, but as an entity that is very special that we can use on our land. So much of this is in regards to Indigenous Regenerative Intelligence.
And now to our interview with host Carrie Kim and James Skeet, Executive Director of Covenant Pathways and Spirit Farm in New Mexico.
Aloha, this is Carrie Kim. Listeners, today we're honored to welcome back James Skeet, co-founder of Spirit Farm and Covenant Pathways, for another deep dive into Indigenous Regenerative Intelligence, Biocosmology, and reclaiming Indigenous life waves to restore harmony with all life on Earth.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, James.
Hello.
Hello. We thank the Diné ancestors for their wisdom and legacy, as today our show originates from Spirit Farm, James and Joyce Skeet's regenerative farm located on the ancestral homelands of the Diné Nation. May the life ways and cosmology of the Diné people continue for generations to come.
Yeah, we hope that it continues and the legacy stays and we won't be uprooted.
By what?
Yeah, that's a good question. By what? Yeah, there's so many things happening in the world today that you don't really know what's around the corner.
Speaking of that, maybe we'll just dive right in with your experience in COVID, because you nearly died, or thought that you might possibly not be here in this realm anyway. And I wonder what that actually engendered for you, given all of your history working with community work, working with the Diné Nation, and also your last decade working at Spirit Farm to help educate others on Indigenous Regenerative Intelligence. What came up for you being at that?
I think COVID was sort of a blow to some things change in that whole, not only contracting COVID. I contracted it, I think, on the first round. One of my sisters first got it, and she passed away. And then a second one got it, and he passed away. And then my brother got it, and he passed away. And the people that I went in with at the hospital, I had to go the second time. The first time they said, well, maybe you can just kind of ride it out. And but it was getting worse. I was not getting enough oxygen in my lungs. And we went back into Gallup. This time the doctor that was there looked like Darth Vader. He was in his suit and all black and breathing through, and trying to talk to me. And he mentioned that there might be a possibility that I might not make it. Mm-hmm. So he was going to run some more tests and then put me into a sub waiting room. I don't know what it was. It was like all a dream. But there were 6 people that were younger than me, natives, that had gone in with me at that time. I was the only one that came out of there, and they were younger than me, which was kind of upsetting because you wonder how Indigenous people are mirroring this virus and what made them so susceptible, or myself being so susceptible to COVID. So in that process, I think I went through a couple weird dreams in that whole kind of hanging on to life and seeing what if I was going to come out of it. One of them was that I needed to finish some projects that I needed to do while I'm present here on Earth, and then await the journey that's coming. So of course they had just come across some toolkits within the hospital, and they shot me with some steroids, and I was able to rebound almost in a day. And the doctors were saying, we've never seen this, we've never seen this. It's you're very responsive to whatever we gave you. And I think it was because of the farming and the good foods we were eating, we were healthy. But the one problem that I was having was clots. They were concerned. It was in my in my leg, and then it went up to my lungs, and then they were fearful that it would go up to my brain. So I just let it go, and I had to make those phone calls to my son Malcolm and my son Martin, which was very interesting in our conversation. One took it very hard up front, the oldest one, and then the conversation was, I'm going to have to hand Mom over to you to take care of her, and he was willing to step up. The youngest one was very encouraging, very positive. He said, Dad, you're going to come out of this. I've been praying. You're going to come out of this, And my conversation with Joyce was that she was in a position, because I've been carrying so much of this work forward and just visionary. And I didn't realize that now she'd had to think it through. And so she said she went for a very long walk, and she saw hawks give her signs and things like that. And so, we were just kind of in this dream time, which I think many people are dealing with, that long COVID dream time. It paused us enough to re-examine our lives and really begin to see that how vulnerable we really are as a nation and people, traveling all over the world. So there's some things that we need to consider and look at. And for me, it was a sort of a check with my life, and to say, what are you really living for? And there is a saying among our clan system, it says, it's not how you die, it's how you live.
You've also spoken about the different directions, and that when we're moving into this direction of the sage or the elder, and that at that point it truly is about what we are giving back out to the community. And it seems like that's kind of where you have said you found yourself now, that you're in this phase of really, not that you haven't done that throughout your life, but maybe it's from a different vantage point.
Yeah, I really feel in the indigenous cosmology, or the cosmology that we're unaware of, is really a result of just these very either tragic or almost like in-your-face situations, stress, crises, that help us along to determine ourselves whether we move forward in the maturity of ourselves, or we fall back to that system that has sustained us for a long time. But what we're realizing is that, that maybe that system can become very abrasive. So I think it takes these sort of cosmology stages, like onion layers, that forces us to re-examine our lives.
So what you've also spoken about rites of passage and initiation, especially relating to maybe men and what's happened with men as far as rites of initiation. Not that women also are lacking in these rites as well, or the honoring of these different stages of life, from childhood to adolescence to becoming a parent, and then the sage or the elder. And I'm wondering how do you feel those rites of initiation can be restored, not only among indigenous peoples, but also for all the settlers who are maybe disconnected from their ancestral heritage lines?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question, because I think what's missing in our colonized indigenous world perspective is that we are missing the reattachment. Not only what roles do we play as men, because all these different stages have certain unique responsibilities and concerns and duties that we have to do. But if it's discombobulated or kind of confusing, or we're not rolling in that expectation of the spirit realm, so to speak, I think what happens is we tend to revert back. I can give you an example of a wounded warrior, which all men have to go through. They become warriors, and they go out and get a job, make a living, bring home the bacon, so to speak. And what happens in that situation is that's the cosmology in which they are in maturity. And then as they become wounded, they get a punch, the wives start laughing at him, because he can't do and function as good as he used to. And so what happens is there is a beating that goes on. The ideals are crushed to the ground. They're forced into this kind of almost an emotional trauma. It can be also a physical trauma. But they go through this stage of really not knowing who they are and what they're about. And this is the wounding stage, which is really necessary for men. So if men deny that wounding, a lot of times they'll find a younger woman, run off with her, or get a fancy sports car, and try to be an adolescent again. But if they migrate and continue to challenge, their spirituality and meditation, they'll move into what they call a mature male. And the mature male is really defined by how he's looking out for the community and not just his family. He's accomplished that. Now he's extending himself to others and allowing others to grow with him in that community. And he'll cover boys that don't have fathers. He'll look out for women. He'll look out for a lot of things in the community and really be a community volunteer participant. And that's the mature male. I think the last 2 months my dad entered into. And this sage stage is people came for his wisdom, came for his prophecies. They sat around him and learned. I remember I had a real difficult problem when I was running a corporation, and I didn't know what to do, who to go to, or who to counsel. So we sat outside on the picnic bench and we started discussing it. I was telling him the story. He didn't say a whole lot. He just kind of looked in the distance and just kind of nodded his head a little bit. And by the time I was done, in my definition or my explaining, rolling out this story of crisis, he said a couple phrases and a couple words that made me feel it was all right. I mean, just quickly. And that was wisdom that was coming from his years of experience. And you can imagine what's happening in this country where we're sending seniors and elders, compartmentalizing them, sending down to Florida, Sun City, and they're away from their grandkids when that wisdom is really necessary and needed for the next generation.
Well, I don't know if that you would like to connect that also with this dual crises we have between autistic children and dementia in the elders, and that what that sort of metaphorically points to as far as that disconnect generationally between the wisdom of the elders and also the child or the youth coming in.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with systemic outcrop of colonization and industrialization compartmentalizes people and makes people objects rather than human beings. And so in this compartmentalization and the progress of production and the means of production, what you have is a lot of these folks that aren't in the production. So in our indigenous worldview, I think a lot of it is incorporated into the system, a larger system, and they're used to deal with power encounters, or they're brought into the community as a very gifted person. So that it's not defined in terms of class and status. It's really or definition of what is productive and what isn't. So
on that point, I think we could also speak about, you've talked about the link between, well, actually that commodity is the flip side of community. And if there's something more you'd like to share about this commoditization of just about everything, even in the regenerative movement, we see that happening. Things get co-opted, things become seized upon and used for profit in some way. Yeah,
what it does, really the result of overproduction is really the commoditization, lowering the price of food. I think in this country we pay the least amount for groceries than a lot of other countries. We don't value because it's been disvalued. The nutrients are taken out of foods. So in a sense, we're fearful of bringing community together because we are individual consumers commoditizing things, and we like that. We live in a world of consumption, and in this world of consumption, what we're missing out is really a sense of what the microbes and what the animals are doing is really creating this community that we know very little about because we're trying to bring in this whole individual rights into context.
Well, it seems that it takes away that feeling of belonging because you belong to a community, right? We know that these people care about us and we care about them. There's a reciprocity there.
Yeah,
So,
it's a mimic, even in nature, in terms of, where predators have siloed pupils, and then you have sheep that has horizontal perspective and looking from side to side. So in those two contexts, you got one that's observing things and one that's extracting things. And so in that perspective, I think what we lose out on is just understanding each other in this context and learning from each other. Instead, we create these racial lines, or we demarcate lands that were ethnic lines, and we make national lines. It goes on and on and on, and it propels itself into this. I know I'm dancing around your question, so...
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
Dance away.
Yeah.
Well, and then speaking about the wolf and the sheep and the predator and the prey, but we know they also need each other, so they also fuel each other in the evolution. Right?
Yes.
That the ecosystem needs both.
Yeah.
You can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
And people tend to take sides and, get rid of all the wolves, shoot all the wolves. I mean, we know that doesn't work. They're restorative to an ecosystem, so...
Yeah. I saw a really recent interesting about the keystone critters. The keystone critters are, like, for example, how they took a bass out of a pond, and what happened was all of these small minnows started reproducing, and it really disrupted that whole ecosystem to where it eventually became very sterile. But they needed the predators to move these animals and eat these animals around. Same way with indigenous people. I think we're a keystone culture. We're an elder nation, where we're presenting perspectives like animism and ancestral ideas, and how do we incorporate that into this kind of concept of removing things and then making things just, I don't know. I think what we need to look back is these marginalized perspectives that have been pushed off to the side.
James, we are going to take a break right here, and we're going to come back and talk more about Indigenous Regenerative Intelligence.
Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you are enjoying Eco Justice Radio. Stay connected by subscribing on all major podcast apps. And visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to check out our previous shows and previous guests. And get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today you're listening to Claimed by the Earth, Native Navajo Wisdom and Biocosmology, with host Carrie Kim and guest James Skeet, Executive Director of Covenant Pathways and Spirit Farm in New Mexico.
So listeners, we're back with James Skeet of Spirit Farm and Covenant Pathways. So James, we were talking about commoditization and also cheap food.
Yeah.
And then also just being out here, you've taken me to several places here on the res. And if anyone has been on a reservation here on Turtle Island, many times you will be encountering poverty. And it's just more of a certain kind of poverty. I don't mean poverty of the spirit, but maybe it could be. But a lot of those cheap foods we know have been imposed upon indigenous peoples for a reason, like an extermination campaign through the foods and addiction. And I wonder what you have to say about moving away from the cheap foods, because we know a lot of indigenous peoples are forced to live at a subsistence level or a below subsistence level by design to keep them disempowered. So how do you see that changing, and also getting the native peoples themselves off the addiction? I know the addiction's been imposed upon them, but then now how do indigenous peoples actually begin breaking out of that for those who are still in that place or dealing with that situation?
It's been very interesting to learn about my own culture, my own addiction, my own substance abuse, my own being raised in a context. I'm so surprised that so many indigenous people have survived the Holocaust, survived the pandemics that the conquistadors brought, the Spaniards, and then on down the line, each settler communities has brought diphtheria, smallpox. So what we have is before 1491, we were functioning at a high level, large populations being able to be self-sufficient, supporting each other. But after 1491, 1492, going in, we have 90% of our populations just disappeared. So what the settler communities saw was this kind of landscape of romanticism and idyllic, when, you saw just many indigenous people just gone. So I think it starts from that kind of conversation into the land that was dispossessed, land that was taken, land that was stolen, land that was taken because indigenous people saw land as commons.
Right.
Everybody using it. The land owns us, we don't own land. So it's this private property, which Sarah Mock and I have been talking about a lot, how this private land has really created this sort of systemic process of policies and government to government relations, sometimes government to just oppress nations, and going in and extracting, mining gold and silver. So it's really been extractive in a sense that many of these settlers were very, very much despotists. They were running from their own sort of ingrained internal oppression, anger, this energy that was very negative, brought to the New World. And then you start this process of dispossessing people and then putting them on so-called reservations, which is another word for putting animals on lands that they can occupy because they're wild. So in that sense, I think what happened was many of the indigenous people lost their ability of using natural resources at its optimum level. And on top of that, they understood the finiteness of what it means to extinct things, and they might have been a part of some of the extinctions, but not to the degree that settler communities have extracted without any ethics. There was always that spirituality, I think, that kept us in balance. So in that imbalance, being put on reservations, we became indigents, we became the white man's burden, so therefore we lost our livelihood. It became a matriarchal society when it has been matrilineal, because the government gave more rations to women because they had their children, and the men totally lost their ability to cover the people. And then came the process of commoditizing food. Whatever bacon or flour that was not appropriate for the larger population ended up on reservations. And so it's just this continued cycle. And in the 50s, they started rationing a lot of commodity foods, which started this whole process of diabetes and hypertension. We actually were living for extinction because we were eating for extinction, I should say, because prior to that, we had a multi-level diet that took from the earth, perennials, buffalo, sheep, whatever it may be, that brought a lot of omega-3s, a lot of nutrient-dense what we call weeds now, but they're high-level, intense medicine weeds. And so there was a whole concept. Even the blueberries up in northern Alaska has so many antioxidants that just overwhelm the blueberries that are in the south, lower 48. So there's a lot of things that I think indigenous people did for their health. But it's always been this tense balance of what you would call balance of feast and famine. They'd feast, but then they'd go through a time of famine, which is how our bodies are set up. We have larger livers, so it can process a lot of meats and proteins, which to settler communities, their whole base is on grains and things from Europe. So there's some things that have added to this kind of disparity. poverty that put us on reservation and reduce us to just a one-way eating pattern, a one-way lifestyle.
And dependency.
And then the dependency economy that we are now dealing with. It's very difficult to farm here because food is cheap, and then they'd rather not work. There's almost like a spirit and heaviness of depression, and I don't blame them because our livelihood and our way of life has been devastated.
Mm-hmm. What happens when you take, well, not that all of indigenous peoples are nomadic, but so many were nomadic, and what happens when you have a nomadic person and you make them be more sedentary? And that was...
Yeah, I think that's the issue right now, is that nomadicism allows you to cover the earth and be able to eat plants that are not within a local context, so it's a larger context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the diversity.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Of life. We've been at your farm for nearly a week now, and anyone who farms knows that it's a great labor of love. And many people abandon organic farming life maybe after 5 years or even less. Many people can't make it. They romanticize about it until they're actually doing the work, especially maybe other people who aren't used to it at all. What words of encouragement do you have for Native people and anyone moving back into their ancestral or regenerative ways of farming?
Don't do it. Don't do it.
He's joking, sort of.
Well, there's a romanticism about agriculture in this country that's been perpetuated by settler communities. I think in the context of subsistence, indigenous nomadic people, you're reintroducing things that were so akin to them and how they're built. And so in this sort of realignment of history into the future, it's how we decolonize ourselves. And the culprit is the colonization of consumption and the colonization of looking at agriculture in a very romanticized context that you mentioned. It's just hard work, you have to be willing to do some hard stuff. But you're living with foods that you've raised yourself. You're in this indigenous, what I call indigenous fractals, images of things that is nature's patterns, nature's ways, and you're cycling within these seasonal things. Mm-hmm. And it's not just linear, it's secular. I think the linearness of agriculture, what does they say, the 5 year sort of shelf life of organic farmers. Mm-hmm. And you got to really question yourself, what are you doing it for? Are you doing it to feed the privilege, which is really what organic farming is? Or are you doing it to heal yourself? Mm-hmm. So in that context with Joyce and I, we had to heal ourselves. The commoditized foods and the colonization and the way of life of corporations that we were in. And now we realize that, we have a really neat way of living that is akin to our ancestors.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've said that, in the beginning, we've talked about this in our first interview with you, that when you first started the farm, you envisioned it to be some kind of a demonstration farm, but over time that collapsed upon itself, and you realized that actually this was a place of healing, and it could be more of an experiential experience, that people would just come here and naturally reconnect with the land, with the animals, and even with the aspect of labor, because that is fundamental, I think, to healing ourselves, is doing things with our hands, being in the visceral connection with nature.
Well, I'm going to bust that apart because I love corn dogs. And I go to the carnival, not to experience all the rides and, and then go to the zoo. I just love corn dogs. And the reason I go there is to eat corn dogs and then leave. It's time to leave now. But there's some people that would like to be entertained. Mm-hmm. They never really make it a part of their, how would you say, lifestyle or life ways. So to me, what we were doing was demonstrating just a place like a zoo. People would experience, just go there just to feel, that they're looking at animals that they're detached from. Mm-hmm. And I didn't like that. It was very, it wasn't right. We were
like
tokenized.
objectified,
objectified, tokenized. Mm-hmm. These animals were just kind of looking back at us and take a lot of pictures kind of stuff.
No reciprocity.
Yeah, there's no relationship. Mm-hmm. But when we moved into experiential, we began to change things. We began to realize that these animals have tremendous amount of intelligence, and they've got a lot to teach us. In that process, we stepped out of the way and let people experience the animals. We never really understand the intelligence that they have to share with us, the energy, I should say, if you really want to get down to the spiritual level. So we stepped out of the way, Joyce and I, and they said, let the farm speak for itself, and it's an experience. And so in this experience, because demonstration, you can make a lot of money out of that. And you can demonstrate that you're a so-called regenerative farm, but people won't change.
Right.
Yeah, people won't change because they just experience it, and it's something foreign to them.
It's just like a vacation.
Yeah, exactly. So when we did the experiential, we really raised the bar and the rights of these animals and the plants and things like that are on the farm itself. As they speak for itself, you give them that sense of dignity or the divinity or whatever you might call it, a divineness about it. So we backed off and said, let's redesign it. And so our mission began to readjust itself. And what we sensed was that we were true to what the farm should be in the future, which is a place where people will come in and be transformed. And so that when they go back, they can start their own farm. It's possible, it's plausible to do that. Before, it was just like, James and Joyce are doing this, it's real cool, they have all these animals, but that's them. So it's like something happened. That's the reason why we called it Spirit Farm, because it deals with people's ethics and spirit.
Maybe if you could go back for those listeners who haven't heard James define Indigenous Regenerative Intelligence, if you could explain what that means to you.
Sure. I have a lot of these dreams, and my wife thinks I'm so smart, but it's like just dreams, just in dream time. And the reason why I think I'm able to capture some of this stuff is because up to 7th grade, I didn't really know how to read and write. I was illiterate, so to speak. But I became literate in the Indigenous way from the teachings of my parents and my grandparents. They were teaching me the Indigenous way of observation. And then when I did learn how to read and write, I just dove into it. I read just as many books as I could get a hold of. The thicker it was, the more it was something I wanted to read, But in that whole process of Indigenous Regenerative Intelligence, I had this dream, IRI. It just floated right in front of my dream vision. And then I said, what is that? And I was having this conversation in the spirit with the Creator. And he said, Indigenous. And I said, well, yeah, it's great. We can throw that word around, Indigenous, codependency, paradigm shift. We don't know what the hell it means, but we seem to like to feel we're so smart.
Right.
Well, the indigeneity is really just using local materials, things that are within our reach, and then using those things that will help us realize that we're a part of this indigeneity in the globe, if you extrapolate it. And then regenerative was because we have such desertified land out here that we're starting from zero going up, and we had to regenerate the plants, the soil, things that could be revived if we just learn how to manage us and understand that we are stewards of the land. And that being said, I don't think we're very good at it. We're still learning. We're still in the process of understanding what best way do we steward the land.
And then what about intelligence? How do you actually know that you're using intelligence?
I was looking through the different ideas of like nature, and there's always been this sense of intelligence that they could have this reciprocity with you. There is this flow of information. If it's just a one-way flow of information, is you're not creating reciprocity. It's just that you're patronizing things, you're tokenizing things. But it was this reciprocity that I think the intelligence of a lot of things that was considered animistic were the intelligence that we need to understand within animals, within plants, within nature itself.
Seems like a lot of words can fit into your definition of intelligence, connection and intuition and reciprocity. All those words seem to fit in this broader word. We say intelligence, but it's not a limit.
It's giving beings the dignity and their rights.
You know, now you're in your 60s now, and having engaged this regenerative farming for, again, this past decade, what do you most want to impart to Indigenous people and also settlers? Just looking back, reflecting on your life, where you are, where you've been.
You know, I'm not doing it for that reason. I think what I'm doing it, you know, really being conscious of what the elders are saying, you know, from the past. I think that's what haunts me. And then the only thing that we have dedicated ourselves, our mission to each other, Joyce and I, is that we want to leave this place in better shape. And I hope we build buildings that fall apart, you know, that they
don't last forever. Yeah. They're not monolithic,
Yep.
you know.
Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying Eco Justice Radio. Stay connected by subscribing on all major podcast apps. And visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to check out our previous shows and previous guests. And get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today you're listening to Claimed by the Earth, Native Navajo Wisdom and Biocosmology, with host Carrie Kim and guest James Skeet, Executive Director of Covenant Pathways and Spirit Farm in New Mexico. This is a quick taste from a video by James and Joyce Skeet of Covenant Pathways as they present an overview connecting ancient Navajo agricultural traditions and beliefs to modern-day farming, called the 6 Sacred Stones of Regenerative Indigenous Agriculture, which you can find on YouTube.
Welcome to our series called 6 Sacred Stones in Regenerative Growing in the Southwest. My name is James Skeet. I'm a Navajo, or from the Diné tribe. My clan is Red Cheek, born of Leaning Tower. My wife is Joyce Skeet from the state of Pennsylvania and relocated to New Mexico some 30 plus years ago. She'll talk a little bit about her background and her struggle and also her successes. Our organization started in 2015 called Covenant Pathways, and we were introduced to some soil scientists who had developed a way to compost and amend soil. Since that time, we have established our own homegrown approach to growing we call Indigenous Regenerative Intelligence. In this series, we'll attempt to define and secure the principles into 6 cohesive pillars called 6 Sacred Stones. Stones to many folks are non-living, inanimate objects, but to Indigenous people, all things are even stones are sacred. Joyce, you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Came from Pennsylvania, a Pennsylvania Dutch background, Mennonite background. So I grew up with a lot of growing and processing foods and gardening. And so I had lots of water. And so talking about the sacred stones of water, this was a whole new thing for me in the Southwest with limited water.
So our mission at Covenant Pathways, or Spirit Farm, which is the name of our farm, is to grow growers and demonstrate the possibilities. We have such a climate issue here. It's so salient in comparison to a lot of other areas. And I guess more and more people are seeing just the climate change that's going on. And our vision at this 501c organization is to really emulate nature's patterns and to follow ancient rhythms. Our purpose is to promote Indigenous regenerative intelligence. Our Diné culture has looked to stones that represents principles and characteristics that help us along through generations, tying ourselves to ancient tried and true ways of life.
Welcome back, listeners. We are here with James Skeet of Spirit Farm and Covenant Pathways, speaking about Diné heritage. And I want to also go back to the words Diné and Navajo, and you've spoken about this before, but it's always good to revisit because there's always someone who hasn't heard it, to understand the difference between the terms and when is it appropriate to use which one. And people have a lot of confusion about what is the right way to identify someone, and if you could share your feelings.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is contextualizing ideas and phrases, you know, the semantics we use. Diné is the reclaimed word from the word Navajo or Indian. So those are things that are in transition in space and time. I think if you were to deal with people that understand that Diné, which is another name for the people, what you get is a sort of a perspective that you're getting a little bit more contextualized. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these words are sort of layered. We're known as the Navajos on the books, but I think like the reclaiming of that Navajo is the people themselves, and that's what's really neat that's happening. You see signs changing, like they changed the mountain named Squaw Peak to a different name that was appropriate for the tribes that were there. Mm-hmm. I think that indigeneity and the semantics that we use are really important because oftentimes it shows our ignorance.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But do you feel that it's actually, to use the word Navajo, would you say it's derogatory or not necessarily so? Or is it also now being used as a bridge because people know that word but they may not know Diné? I mean, that's where there's all this confusion
I
around it.
would take the latter, it's like a bridge, it's but the more you get to know people, the more you get to understand that there is a different people group, and it's across the board. I think we've been kind of consumed by this melting pot, which I think is oftentimes, usually the dominant culture is one that makes the names. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But for Indigenous people, I think it's really important how you negotiate within tribal or government-to-government relations.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So speaking of this, then I wanted to go into a question. Well, it was a statement you made about, I have a love-hate relationship with my culture. And it's a big question, but I wonder if you could elaborate on that because it's honest. It's an honest, thing to say.
Well, boy, you put me on the spot there.
But I think it's like I said, it's honest.
Yeah. I think the love that I have is more the love, not just for the Navajos, but across the board. There's a lot of impoverished communities that speak a different language. They negotiate in a different way through space and time. And those are things that I feel are really close to because, I've always been an underdog. My wife, that's how she came to the res. She's being Mennonite and she felt like, hey, this is a real good purpose in my life. And she's really become a part of the people. Mm-hmm. The hate is the bureaucracy, the natives that oppress our own people. Mm-hmm. It's people that have arrived with their education and are now, really exploiting that tokenism. Mm-hmm. Those are the natives I hate. The Navajo-ness of that government bureaucrats that just drive me to no end because they're just like what the government has done is created all these barriers, and they seem to almost double that.
Right. And
so it's very difficult. And I think there's power things that are working, But I've always liked the indigenous local people that are really trying to, live their lives. Like today we went to visit a family and you saw, just the tenderness and how, being a part of that, I felt really comfortable because, those are my people.
Right, yeah. Yeah, they're very personable from the get-go.
Yeah.
There's no airs. It's just very.
And they were happy to see us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You come from a warrior clan of the Diné, but you also explained that being a warrior means being willing to lay down our lives for a community. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you feel that you are seeing this kind of warriorship today.
Not necessarily. I think we're watching too many movies, and we'd rather play that out in the movies. There's a lot of people that have sacrificed where we're at. I think about the walk to Fort Sumner, Bosque Redondo. Those guys, my ancestors, laid down their lives so we can have this bloodline here. So in that sense, I think we should never ever forget what our ancestors have done and what they suffered, in the Holocaust of the oppressor. So I think in some contexts, we need that warriorship back, men and women that are willing to lay down their lives for their people. Mm-hmm. Just like what the microbes do, these are the least of these, but
right.
many of them are dying on behalf so that we can grow the plants that we need. So I think from a cosmology level, we're living in a very consumer, very polished, which is part of the prophecy of the Navajos, very polished and well world that is very superficial. So I think we need to get back to that sense of we need to lay down our lives for our communities in some sense, but I don't know what really that sense is. For us, I think it's just providing opportunities here for our workers. I'm trying to pull as much resources in here so that we can, really pay our workers well, as well as educating, the people. And the people are hungry. You saw that in one of the chapter houses that we went to go visit, and how very meek they were, and yet in a sense they were hungry for the information that we have to give. That's, to me, that's part of the things that we should be laying our lives down for, is really allowing people to have access and to have alternatives to break the cycle of poverty.
Feels like the laying down of our lives is really more of a commitment, to continue serving community regardless. That's the giving up of our lives, or the giveaway of our lives, is just to keep serving. Just like nature does. It's like the cycle of nature is always constantly giving and receiving. That's how it works. We've talked a lot about the strong contrast between Western systems of education, or indoctrination, we could say, and Indigenous intelligence, or a cosmological learning. And you've said in the Western system, failure is more absolute versus relative. I wonder if you could speak more about that.
I think I was talking in the context of impoverished, disenfranchised communities. They see failure as absolute, when they should be seeing failure as a part of future success, a sustainable success, a regenerative approach to life, that life will grow, but we're in this condition right now, so how do we overcome those barriers? And so I think in that context, it makes a lot of sense. But it doesn't make sense to me when you have very privileged communities and they don't really understand, the full context of what it means to not have.
Right. Or what it means to be privileged also.
Yeah. And it's very dangerous. I think this privileged community is very dangerous. Gentrification, removal of things, synthesizing things. I think sometimes we need to deal with the hardships. The things that we want isn't always there. It's an easy, just get on Amazon and order.
Placate yourself. Instant gratification, immediate gratification.
Yeah, but we're losing that kind of character and that discipline. And that's part of the thing that I hound on, is that the cosmology needs to have a lot of discipline around it. The meditation needs to have a lot of discipline. The spirituality needs a lot of discipline. Not this new age stuff, which is a smorgasbord of whatever you want to eat,
It's DIY.
Yeah.
Take what you wish, but you don't really have to really sacrifice anything.
Yeah. And so it's a response of that ethics, or I should say morality, of this sense of guilt, white guilt, or whatever you call it. I think there's a lot of guilt in people today because, their walls are padded, they're soft, their beds are soft. They don't really have to deal with non-running water or
lack of electricity.
So the hardship isn't there,
Yeah, starvation. There's so many things. In our times, there are many elderly, and more so as the baby boomer generation ages, but fewer and fewer elders possessing true, genuine Indigenous wisdom are still alive today. We know that. And despite ageism being more prevalent and there's disconnection intergenerationally, do you feel that elders and youth are finding allies in each other?
Not really. The elders are very rough on the young people. And the young people are not really taking the time of their busy schedules to take the time to go out and see an elder. So you get this two real separation taking place. It's like detachment. I think it's the detachment that needs to be healed. It needs to be brought back. The elders in my generation were very legalistic and rough. Like in the butchering that we do, there's a lot of native young people that want to learn how to butcher sheep, and they're embarrassed by it because the way they were treated on butchering a sheep, where it was really rough. Instead of making mistakes and going on. And then the elders, a lot of this generation of elders have been very privileged. They've had a lot of stuff for them, senior center homes and things like that. Because the reason why I say it is because I used to work in Medicaid and help a lot of elders, and they always want something done for them. And there's no reciprocity there. So everything's been kind of linearized. Now and then you'll come across an elder and those are humble people.
Right.
And they're not visible a lot of times. You have to go seek them. And so I think it's that whole disconnection that's happened in our culture. And all over the world. I think, just the way we send elders down to Florida or elders down to Sun City.
Send them somewhere else where you have to interact with them.
Yes, exactly.
Whatever is their situation. Like, people don't want to deal with the difficult situations. Aging, whether it's their parents or relatives. And, but how to restore that is the question, because how to reconnect those threads, because we know the elders in ancient times, the elders were always connected with the youth. I mean, it was all about that diversity of the generations, and that's what makes for healthy community, healthy societies, is that there's interaction among the ages.
Yeah, I think it's difficult in this kind of society in this day and age, because we consider elders really getting dumb. One of the ladies that I worked with, that when my parents were aging and they needed a lot of help, their independence was gone. And she would come out and watch what I was doing when I worked on cars. And my first reaction was, Mom, you're going to fall. You need to go back inside and sit on the couch, And she took me aside and she says, don't talk to your mom that way. She's still an adult.
Right.
And she needs to be out there. Even though she falls, you just deal with it, So I think we're treating elders like disability, or people that are special. And we're doing that to kids, we're telling them they're special, when what they need to learn to do is chop wood and work with sharp knives, and we've isolated so much of that real life experience that I think can help us.
The true learning that is like that learning through making mistakes and trying again, and that's also the observation too, right? In the learning.
Exactly.
You have said that indigeneity means our history becomes our future.
Yeah.
So could you explain what you meant by this?
Well, it's to decolonize. It means that we're taking our history that was in the past, beyond the conventional things, the influence of the settler community, going way back, and which our ancestors really ate well, in the sense that their microbiome in the gut was good. I think if you just go back and eat what your grandmothers were eating, you'll really get back to health. It's just taking that forward and doing what our ancestors have done in the past, and decolonizing ourselves, because colonization has created this really bad stomach, leaky gut syndrome, things that I think has been detrimental to us, because we want to consume cheap foods.
And that's been what's been available, right, since the government foods that were given and these things. Yes. It's just been a legacy of that, and it's in very addictive foods, as we know. They're eating modern industrial wheat or these things that just keep getting passed on. If we are all indigenous to this planet, as we say, what do you feel is our responsibility to it?
I would, I don't know if I can answer that question itself, but I think we need to have ceremony. We need to pray. We need to get answers from nature. We need to lie on our land and see what our land is saying, see what our plants are saying. I think we need to seek that intelligence that is in nature. Our responsibility is to hear, not just to act on something that we hope will happen, but it's really understanding the intelligence that are all around us, and how do we tie into that? How do we tie it into the indigenous fractals? How do we have the ethics to do that? To be able to humble ourselves, to seek that lowest level, so that we can understand a deeper kind of metaphor that's going on that should be played out in actuality.
Well, we met with the Zuni elder today that you took us to.
Oh, he's a nice man.
And what is... And this word came up that he had shared, and it was cultural responsibility. And I wonder what you feel is our cultural responsibility, whether you are a native person or you're a settler on the continent where you're living now. What do you feel that it might be?
Yeah. Cultural responsibility, I think when I look at it, it's just doing what feels ethically right, in the context of nature, in the context of your relations, the two-legged, the four-legged, the plant hyphae, and all those are really, having that sense of ethics, to be responsible in the action of being a good steward, having that spiritual stewardship, not just the physical stewardship, but the spiritual stewardship. What does that mean? It's going to be something that Joyce and I are going to be trying to figure out, the rest of our lives.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something everybody has to find out by actually connecting.
Yep.
Right, as you said, listening to the land and truly making relationships.
Yes.
Relationships in nature with all the living beings that inhabit this planet. And we know this is a time that's been prophesied, really, of Indigenous peoples leading. And we also know this is a time when many Indigenous communities are dealing with colonizer influences. Many of them have come up in colonizer schools, Western schools, and they've been in that mindset, as you said. And so we know you don't, as that saying goes, you don't take down the master's house with those tools, with the same tools. So how to foster intra-tribal and inter-tribal collaboration, as well as collaboration between Indigenous communities and settlers, that we know we need to unify. And we see these conflicts that occur and ego that arises, but we also at the same time know we all need to come together for a greater purpose to actually revitalize the planet.
Yeah. So really true collaboration, when you enter and step into it, is beautiful. You belong, and you feel like you can give in that context because it's safe. Mm-hmm. We don't feel safe today. Ego is really our distraction. And I've been working on some pieces called Disrupted by Nature, Distracted
your book.
by Ego. Yeah. So those are things that I really believe in my own heart, is that I got to start with me. And when I start with me, it's really about my ego and humility. And then as I move forward, I realize that, hospitality is a big part of connecting people together in a community. And once you get that community, what you get is energy that is really just the way nature works, It works in community and collaboration.
I'm wondering how you, growing up in your oral traditions and your life ways with your grandfather and I guess your father, your parents, how they fostered humility in you.
Yeah, I think they did. They modeled it, but I didn't quite. I didn't quite roll in humility until I got married. I realized how arrogant I was. My wife pinpoints that every day. It's like, okay, buddy, you need to learn to serve me. Yeah, and that's even with having a lot of animals. There was one lady that came over and he says, I don't have any animals because I don't like animals.
Oh.
I said, you are really impoverished, girl. Because I think having that responsibility, that shared responsibility, animals tend to always give back. They're looking for reciprocity. But I think if we start treating them as human beings, that's when we go wrong. We dumb them down, and then we need to really seek their intelligence, how we can learn from their intelligence. The way communities today are treating dogs is terrible. It's like they have their own graveyards, they have their own, I don't know. I mean, I read a piece a couple years back, as the culture will go down if we start treating dogs better than human beings. And so I think we're at that stage.
I think we've been at that stage for a while.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question about time. We've got just a little bit of time left, but it's important to ask you about the Diné perception of time rolling over us versus penetrating time, something you often say.
The Greek perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, seize the moment kind of thing, rather than receive the moment. So both of those concepts came out of two Navajo medicine men. So it's kind of a juxtaposed position in terms of how Indigenous people view time. And I think it's changing. We are blasting into sequences of time being sped up. because there's so many things that are on our plates now that we really don't know how to be, you know. And the word human being is being, not doing. And well, I live with a Mennonite lady that wants to prescribe to that idea of working out your salvation through toil. And I have to slow her down, you know. And she does the same thing to me too, you know. Stop being and start doing sometimes, you know.
Yeah, there's a balance, right?
Yes, and I think that's what we need to look for, is that balance.
James, thank you so much for sharing again about Indigenous Regenerative Intelligence and your life, and all of the humility that you've cultivated, the wisdom you've cultivated over the years, and everything that you've given to community and to peoples and to teaching people and helping them. Just modeling. I mean, teaching by modeling, and also having them learn through their own experiences. I wonder if you could share how people can connect with you and Spirit Farm and Covenant Pathways, the things you do here at the farm.
Yeah, we have a website called spiritfarmnm.org. That's probably the best way to do it. And there's a place where you can send your email. We're very interested in sort of the experiential on the farm, so you're welcome to come and visit the farm or stay here, you know. So people are transformed, and that's what we really appreciate, Joyce and I. And we're building sort of a revolution with a lot of people, and we're just a part of that.
You're finding all those people that have that same heart, right, as you said.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, James. We're so grateful to have you on the show. We're grateful to be here at your farm right now. And listeners, do check out covenantpathways.org.
NM. Yeah.
And also there's a lot of videos that are available with James being interviewed as well on YouTube. So come out to the farm anytime.
Thank you.
But be ready to work.
Yeah.
Be ready to experience.
Thank you to our guest, James Skeet of Spirit Farm in New Mexico, and thank you to our listeners for joining us. This has been Claimed by the Earth, Native Navajo Wisdom, and Biocosmology. For an extended version of this interview, become a member of our Patreon or visit our website at ecojusticeradio.org. Please connect with us on social media at Ecojustice Radio, SoCal350, and my website, Wilder Utopia. If you like what you've heard and you want others to be informed, subscribe, share the episodes, and help us continue our efforts by joining our Patreon or making a tax-deductible donation to the show. Project of SoCal 350. The show can be found on KPFK, KPFT, all major podcast apps, and at ecojusticeradio.org. Executive producer, myself, Jack Eit, co-host Jessica Aldridge, co-host Carrie Kim, and engineer and original music by Blake Quake Beats. Until next time, remember, the power is yours.